Welcome. Thank you so much, and welcome to any of our guests to today's webinar. My name is Devin Arciniega. I work for the City of San Bernardino Municipal Water Department, the organization that is hosting this class today. So we're really glad to have you. Today, we are having our first virtual landscape workshop. You may have participated in one of our in-person workshops, and this is our first go at a virtual presentation. So thank you again. This is webinar, so you won't be able to ask questions out loud, but there are a couple of features that we can use. So if you have questions during the presentation or any comments that you'd like to share, you can either type that into the chat, and also you should be able to raise your hand. There's a raise hand feature near the show participants. And if you raise your hand, I'll be watching for that. And if you have a question that you would like to speak out loud, I can unmute you so you can do that and discuss with our instructor. So this webinar is going to be recorded. If you would like to refer to any of the information that you get today, it's going to be posted on our social media platforms, and the full video is going to be posted on our department's YouTube channel. So I can also follow up with you. I have your email address. I can follow up with any attendees today and send out the link to that YouTube channel so you can review the webinar on your own time. So if I could have our participant today, if I could please have you try and use the raise hand feature so you can confirm that you're able to use it, or the chat. Oh, I see you've got that. Thank you so much. All right. So when I see that, I'll go ahead and unmute you if you have any questions. If it's in the middle of the presentation, we may wait because we have a few sections where there's a break and opportunities. Allison, our instructor today, will also be able to let us know a good time to stop and ask for any questions. But if you need anything during, just go ahead and raise that hand up and I'll help you out. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our instructor today. Her name is Allison Loki with Allison Loki and Associates, and she's been doing landscape workshops for us for some years now, and she does a wonderful job. This is, I believe, also your first official virtual workshop, so we're excited to have you for that today. Thank you.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay? Good, good. Thank you, Devin. And thank you for the opportunity to try this different format during our pandemic process. I want to thank the City of San Bernardino. I've been teaching for them for a number of years, and I teach for other entities too, but Devin is hands above to be able to work with the City of San Bernardino. So we have a new PowerPoint. I don't know if anybody's attended one of the landscape classes that we previously had, but this is a brand new PowerPoint. It features different plants and different information. And that way people can maybe view it over and over again and get something out of it every time. So I'm gonna share my PowerPoint screen and we'll get started. So let me get that done real quick. And let me see. There we go. And so here we are. I'm gonna take myself off video just for a second. So we will get started. Again, thank you to the City of San Bernardino for the opportunity to take this class. This is our agenda for today. We're gonna go over some design principles, some plant materials, some seasonal landscape maintenance, and some irrigation techniques. The plant that you see there on the left is featured later. That is a native plant, a California buckwheat, and we will be focusing on different plants that you can use that are pretty maintenance free and also will improve the habitat in your own backyard. So let's get started. You know, we become very trapped in a certain idea of how a landscape should look. And for most of us in Southern California, that landscape should look like grass. And while grass certainly has a place in our gardens, especially if you have children or dogs, it's not probably very conducive to our own habitat. It is, after all, brought over from Europe by the first settlers and then brought from the East Coast to the West Coast. And of course, those places have a lot more water. So we need to rethink that idea and use grass appropriately and hopefully put in plants that are native to our area or at least use less water. The water issue is not going away. We have a huge population. It continues to grow. We don't have a lot of natural water within Southern California, so we bring it from other places. There's plenty of water for life necessities, for example, for bathing, for cooking, for personal use. But to just throw away water on grass is not such a great idea. So we need to rethink our landscapes for things that are more suitable for our own climate and our own ecology. We need to look at drought tolerant alternatives. And I also think that we need to look at landscapes and gardens as an extension of our home rather than a separate entity that is never used. Front yards are a really good example of this. Most of us don't use our front yards for anything other than an appearance for the front of our house, but backyards fall into this trap as well. It is always helpful to do some research first. Now, I'm featuring two very, very good books here, but that's not maybe the easiest way to go. The best way to go probably is to look at gardens. Go and research what you like in different gardens. And we have a handout for different gardens throughout Southern California. And there are also a variety of websites, including Las Felitas, Theodore Payne, and the BeWaterwise.com website. They will give you some different ideas or alternative landscapes. And then I would ask you to look at what grows in your own neighborhood, what landscapes you like. Eventually, we'll do a house that focuses on my yard, but that's kind of funny because in my area, where I live in an old riverside neighborhood. There's a lot of grass. There's grass in everybody's house. And then there's my house. And then there's more grass. And then there's my neighbor's house. And my neighbor's house and mine are not devoted to grass. Consequently, our water bills are very low and we have very low maintenance. So look what's going on in your own neighborhood as a way to get started on what you want to do with your own landscape. This is a pretty typical front yard in Southern California, and they're usually, of the entire landscape surface, they're usually 80 to 90% turf. But if you look across all of Southern California, and I've worked for 3 different water purveyors, about 80% of the water that we either get from somewhere else, like the Colorado River or the Delta up north, or water that we pump from underground from a groundwater aquifer, almost 80% of that water that we procure and we treat to drinking water standards is used for grass outside. In my own neighborhood, last summer, there were 2 days that reached 117 degrees. You almost have to pour water on grass at that point just to get it to survive. Unfortunately, we don't even have warm season grasses planted. Mostly in Southern California, we have cool season grasses planted, which would be like Kentucky bluegrass or fescue. And they were just required to survive 40 to 60 inches of water, just to survive. Compare that with our rainfall, which is between 10 and 12 inches a year. That's on an average year. We go many years where we only get 2 or 3 inches, and then some years we'll get significantly more. Southern California is kind of feast or famine that way. But if your average precipitation or rainfall is 10 to 12, that means that you have to purchase through your water meter additional water just to keep your grass alive, which is not a very good economic decision. It's not a very sustainable way to grow our society. And it's also pretty boring, which you're going to look at next. This is a visual representation of how much water you have to purchase every year, aside from what we get naturally, just to keep your grass alive. It's also a lot of maintenance. So I think it's time to readjust our perspective on how this works for us and what might work better. So I'm going to give you some ideas today on that. This is an example of a very water-wise landscape. You'll notice the rocks to the right, in the upper right, closer to the front door. Those are not just for show. Not only do they keep weeds down and they look nice, they also provide a place for stormwater when we do have water or we do have rain to percolate back into the aquifer. This is a better water-wise solution for landscape in Southern California. It's also quite beautiful to boot. So water-wise design is not dusty, dry, or hot, okay? It's not boring. It's not limited. Really, it's quite creative. It is not maintenance-free, however. It is a different type of maintenance, and you're still gonna do some maintenance, but it's significantly less maintenance, less waste, less water, and it is not ugly. If you see an ugly water-wise design, I'm going to guarantee you that it was done either in a rush or people didn't plan it ahead of time. I would urge everyone to really spend a significant amount of time in the planning phase so that you're happy with the ultimate project when it's done. What it is very colorful. This alone attracts a lot of people to water-wise design. It should be creative, it should be fresh. It certainly is in my neighborhood because it's mostly turf. It is possible. I think people get the idea that it's overwhelming. There's too much to it. I would urge you to break it down in phases and look at it in different, like the design is one phase, construction is another phase, maintenance is another phase. And like any garden, it evolves. It's not always going to be the same year after year. And that's also part of the beauty of it. It is a much smarter way to live in a sustainable environment. And I already mentioned the maintenance and the water. But one of the things we don't talk about enough probably is that it creates a habitat for our native birds, our native bees, butterflies, insects. And that's very, very important. We've wiped out entire species of plants that provide food and shelter for birds, for butterflies. And the nice thing I've discovered is that if you create a water-wise design and you incorporate some native plants or even plants that are not native but attract butterflies, for example, they will come. Almost like magic, they will come. The plants that you see in this picture are verbena, which is the purple plant in the front. The yellow plant in the very back is yarrow. That is also a native plant to this area, and it will attract butterflies. It's a butterfly plant. So how do you get there? How do you go from one to the other? And that's what we're going to talk about today primarily. How do you go from the one on the left to the one on the right? I guess a key idea is that form follows function. You should think about what you're using the space for in your design. If it's in your front yard, typically it's only to provide a backdrop for your house. In my case, I have a very large front yard. I live on an old property in Riverside, and the front yard is quite large. So for me, because I didn't want grass, my function was to provide a habitat for birds and bees and butterflies, but it was also to provide an example of what a beautiful yard could look like. That was my function. But in the backyard, my function is very different. And I think you need to really think about what you use your space for and what your climate is. Sunset Magazine puts out sunset climate zones. And if you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to look at that. We are primarily in sunset zones 18 and 19, which means that we're an interior climate with almost no ocean influence. Even if you were living somewhere like Corona, you would have an ocean influence. Orange County is completely influenced by the ocean. It makes a much more moderate climate. But in the interior areas, it's a lot more changeable. We get a lot hotter. We also get a lot colder. So you need to plan for that when you're doing your design and your plant species. You probably want to take a look at what you really like and what you really want. And it's best to think of your backyard as rooms. We'll talk about that more in depth in a minute, but one idea might be, let's say that you have a barbecue area in your backyard. That really functions like a kitchen, right? If you have a sitting area in your backyard, that functions like a living room. Almost every room, with the exception of the bathroom, can be thought of outside. And that's part of the function of it. Obviously, the function of your barbecue area is to provide food, just like it does in your house, in your kitchen. The living room area, and I've seen some people have these very, very specialized outside where they even have televisions. That's just another living room. So you need to think of the functionality of it the same way. You need to think of color, what colors you like, what colors you want, how these colors make you feel. Unity and repetition are your friends in the garden. If you want a free-flowing, beautiful garden, you want to utilize the principle of unity and repetition. And you also must think about maintenance. How much maintenance are you willing to do? The picture on the right is a section of my backyard. And you will notice that there is a fountain in the very front of it. That fountain is designed to be seen from my kitchen as well as from outside because birds come there and I like to look at that. But what's the maintenance on that fountain? Not very much, really. About once a year, I have to clean it. That's it. It takes up space and it looks pretty without giving me a maintenance headache. The rocks around it are designed to keep weeds out and make the fountain look good, but they also provide less maintenance because there's nothing growing there. In the foreground, you see a rose. The rose that I selected is a typical shrub rose, but it doesn't need deadheading, which means removing the dead blossoms. It doesn't need any maintenance other than a once a year trim and a twice a year feeding. It is not a native plant. It's just a way to incorporate roses because that happens to be something I like. So this is an idea of the thought process behind the maintenance issue. You do need to take a little inventory besides the form follows function. You're probably going to need storage for your trash cans. You're probably going to need screening for privacy. You might need a kid's play area. I don't need that anymore, but you might need it. And so children need to have a place in the garden as well. And dogs do too. If you're going to eat outside, you might need a barbecue dining area. And what about shade? I'm very fortunate in my backyard in that my neighbors all have very, very large trees that shade my backyard for most of the day. So I didn't have to really worry about that. But nobody wants to sit outside if it's baking sunlight. Do you want color and fragrance in your yard? Do you need room for people to come over? I have a large family and a small house. So we're fortunate in Southern California in that I can entertain my children and grandchildren in the backyard. So that's a very helpful thing for me. Do you want an edible landscape? Do you want something that you can eat? All right. That is not my priority, but you might really want to grow vegetables. Do you want a cutting garden where you can take things, cut them and take them into your house? Are you providing habitat? And what will the rest of your areas be used for? So this is a really good creative opportunity for you to um, decide on how you want your own landscape to be. You may have new spaces with pathways and seating areas. You have a garden that ends up having a purpose. Hopefully you're doing a California friendly plant palette, which may be either native or Mediterranean plants. And you're going to choose an irrigation system that is water wise. In this case, more often than not, that's drip irrigation. But it might just be water efficient spray nozzles or weather smart controllers. I use a weather smart controller. It actually looks at the weather every day and decides how much to water. Do I override it? Sure. Occasionally I'll override it, but not very often. Okay, so we talked a little bit about rooms, all right? And this is a really important concept in the garden. And I'm going to give you my example. I have a really small house, quite small. I have a pretty large family. They don't all live at home anymore, which is why I have a small house. But I have rooms designed in my backyard, right? And those rooms have functions. We already talked about the barbecue. We already talked about the living room. But something I would like you to think about too is what would be your bedroom, right? Maybe you want a small private area. That's basically what you're seeing in this picture. Somebody set up what's essentially a bedroom in their backyard where they have a private area that is just for them and perhaps their spouse. You need to walk through your landscape when you're doing a design and say, okay, what do I really need here? I need a place to sit with my family. That might be a living room. I need a private area for my space where I'm not sure, maybe I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to read a book or whatever. That's the equivalent of a bedroom. And you need to create walls and hallways and pathways that will essentially provide that for you. And of course, everybody wants to eat in the backyard, right? So you need an eating area. You need a table, perhaps. That would be your dining room. Treat it like a dining room. Things would you have in a dining room? Well, you'd have a table. You'd have chairs. You might have some extra seating. You might have a light because nobody wants to eat in the total darkness. You'd have a cooking space. So this idea of thinking like your backyard, like a landscape or like a house is really helpful. When you think of it that way, it makes it a lot easier to make design decisions. Here's a good example of that. This is an example of a private space. Somebody has thought, I need a private space where I might sit with only my significant other, and I want to make it feel cozy and comfortable. And they've done that by putting up some shrubbery, by putting a bench, and really the pathway functions as a hallway. Nobody is going to veer off the pathway in this example. Okay, they're not going to. They're not going to walk through the shrubs. They're not going to walk through the plants on the left. They're going to walk straight down what is now a hallway. This is actually a not very difficult design to do. Let's dissect it just for a second. It's a pretty muted color palette, for one thing. You don't see a whole lot of color in this. It's mostly varying greens with a little bit of red. This automatically makes it a little calmer. They've set up a seating area. They have almost the equivalent of a bed headboard behind them with the fence. They have tall shrubbery on the right-hand side. All of this creates this sense of confined space, and you're not going to find a lot of people wandering back there. To put it more clearly, if two people are sitting back there, other people aren't naturally going to come back there. It automatically gives the signal that it's a more private space. That's something that you might want to think about creating in your own yard, is a private space for you and a private space for you and your significant other, or maybe just a special child, a grandchild. Here's another example of creating an outdoor room. Okay, I'm going to go back one because I missed something. That pathway was created using flagstone and a plant that you'll look at later called dichondra. I always get the name wrong. Okay, that was a very inexpensive fix. Okay, that's just a few pieces of flagstone and a few plants that have been irrigated enough to fill in between. Yet it gives you a real pathway. Pathways are important. In this one, they've created a room with some different type of hardscape. It's basically some stones that they put together. They're concrete pavers that are different sizes and different spaces. Concrete pavers are a little bit more complex. They need to be laid on pebbles or sand, but it is not a big job. Look at the difference in the colors. This is obviously a private space for two people. We know that because there's two chairs. That's it. But look at the colors around. They've also created living walls with their pink plants and their white plants. It's a little informal. You can always go more formal by adding shrubs, for example, that are just green and hedged, but it is a truly lovely room. They've also incorporated some dichondria in this also in between the spaces that go in the pathway spaces. You can clearly see on this that there's a pathway and then there's a room. The room is where there's no more green space between the concrete pavers, but the pathway gives people visual permission to go in to that room. So these are just some ideas of how you're going to create a room within your garden. Don't get the idea that you can't have any grass. I think grass is super functional. And there are some places where you're only going to want to use grass. No doubt about it. It's tough and it's hardy. Nothing survives dogs and children like grass does. Now they've used the grass for a different reason here. And they've used it to create another private space. But I could see this easily being different. This could be a space with a children's play center on top of it, where kids could go play. This could have a table and chairs on it, and then be an eating space, because grass is very comfortable for a barbecue area. Now, the rest of their yard is pretty water wise. They've got some trees, they've got in the background, some beyond their fence, some inside their fence. But all of those plants, and this is a pretty new garden, are water wise. They also have a dry creek bed running through it. That's to draw water from rain into that creek bed and filter it down into the aquifer. They've also sloped it that way to do that. It wasn't like it happened by accident. That's a guiding principle now in landscape design, is that we want to recharge our aquifers. It actually has two good reasons for it. It not only recharges the aquifer, but it keeps water from running out onto the street. What happens when it all runs out onto the street is it clogs the flood channels, right? We have to whisk it away or it'll flood people's homes. So if you can keep it on your property and then let it percolate back into the aquifer, we're all better off in this case. So they've limited their turf to a useful space. They've made it, as it says in the slide, the crown jewel of their landscape. That's not a bad idea, but it is very limited on how they've used it. A typical Southern California landscape, this would all be grass, okay? But instead, they've reduced their maintenance and their water use by having only small functional areas of grass. And it looks beautiful. They did a beautiful job. The thing you really have to avoid, look at this fine gentleman, is that you can't do the I'll have one of everything. You have to be really disciplined. To create a beautiful garden, you need discipline. Now, you already have discipline if you have grass, because you've got one plant, one type of plant, and one color. You may have other things around it, but that's the way grass is, right? It's all green, hopefully, and it's all one type of plant. So if you're going to do a water-wise garden, the typical response is, I'll have one of this, one of this, one of this, one of this, one of this. So in your design phase, when you're researching, really look at what you like. You want to narrow down your color palette, your plant palette, your materials palette, and then stick to them. Just scathingly stick to them. We're going to go over color and plants, but I do want to say something about materials. If you select brick and gray pavers, then stay with brick and gray pavers. Don't all of a sudden decide that you're going to throw in some flagstone. It's going to look disjointed. It's not going to flow. Stick to 2 or 3 different materials, and that's it. Don't deviate from that. It will make such a difference in the way your hardscape turns out. So don't be this guy. Don't be the I'll have one of everything guy. So let's talk about color. I think this is the place everybody needs to start, is color. How you feel about different colors is really critical to how your yard turns out, because colors matter. Look at the color wheel, and there's all sorts of words that have been associated with particular colors over time. But I can tell you this, hot colors are a lot more energetic and they pop to the foreground. That means if you walk in a yard that's yellow and red, you're going to notice those colors. If that's the feeling that you want in your yard, that's what you should go with. If those are the colors you love, then that's what you should go with. Cooler colors like the pinks, the lavenders, the blues are much more calming. They recede back into the background. If those are the colors that you love, you should go with them. Green is a neutral in the yard. You can think of it like brown. It's just a neutral color, brown or beige. And no matter what, white makes everything look better. So if you choose hot colors, don't hesitate to throw some white in there with it. And if you choose cool colors, also don't hesitate, because that is going to make those other colors look better. From my own personal experience, I have a somewhat stressful life. Not horrible, I don't want to give that impression, but stressful. For me, I use only cool colors. The reason is I want my yard to give me a feeling of calmness and serenity. That is the exact opposite of my mother's yard. My mother's yard is all red and yellow. It's very energetic. It's very vibrant. It's also very, very beautiful. But I know the effect of color, and I know that in my own life, I need calmness. So I have chosen to stay with these other colors, and it's worked for me. And then, of course, I have white and a lot of green. Okay, a lot of green in there. Here's some examples of the way colors look. Analogous colors are very closely related on a color wheel. Okay, and this is the calming effect that you're going to get if you use these muted colors within the color wheel and you use the ones that are next to one another. I always say you don't have to worry so much about that. If you know that you're going to stay with pinks and blues and lavenders, as long as they're not super vibrant, they're going to go. The same thing, if you stay with oranges, reds, and yellows, as long as they're vibrant, they're going to go. They're analogous. They're also going to be quite beautiful together. So this is a really good example of that. Here are your cooler colors, right? Soft pinks, whites. Notice the effect of the white in this yard. It makes everything else look better. But look at how the lavender just recedes into the background. When you look at this picture, you notice the pinks first. Then you probably notice the whites. Then you notice the lavender. It's a very different effect than it is when you use hotter colors like this, okay? When we say they hold up in the bright sun, that means exactly that. In the bright sun, pastels are going to recede even further. The hotter colors, they're going to be a lot more vibrant when it's very sunny outside. You notice the red hot poker, which is the tall plant first. It's very vibrant and bright, the reds and yellows. You're going to notice the white in this yard. It is a very bright, vibrant yard, but you can notice the differences immediately in how you feel. I'm going to flip back. When you look at this picture, you're going to have a feeling about it. When you look at this picture, you're going to have a different feeling. I would go with the one that gives you the better feeling. That's what you should do. Now, this is a whole different color scheme entirely. This is a monochromatic color scheme. And you can do it with colors other than white, although in this picture, they are only using green and white. This is also called a moon garden. And a moon garden is only green and white. And there are many plants out there, believe it or not, that look best in moonlight. For example, there are some agaves that they're almost silvery in moonlight. So if you're going to plant a moon garden, it's going to look a lot better at night than it does during the day. I've seen some beautiful examples of that. But in this monochromatic scheme, you wouldn't have to use white. You could use green and pink, green and red, green and yellow. No matter what, they're always easy and they're very elegant. Even though this is a pretty overgrown garden, it is not hedged. It is not very well trimmed. It's pretty free flowing. It still is very elegant and very calming with just because they have used a monochromatic color scheme. So that's something to think about. It's also easier. It's much easier to use a monochromatic color scheme. It will bring you unity, which is one of the key design principles. Now let's talk about unity and repetition. So you have a really beautiful example here of both. They have repeated. This is lavender. Lavender is a plant from the Mediterranean. It's not a California native. There's many different kinds of lavender. There's French lavender, Spanish lavender. There's Italian lavender. And they're a wonderful plant to use in Southern California because they're very heat tolerant and they live a nice long time and they smell great. You can actually use them for your lingerie drawer or just make everything smell wonderful. But the key here is that they have repeated the lavender all the length of the pool. And it does give it a very pleasant, flowing sensation. This might not be your cup of tea, but no matter what, in a really well done garden, they really have no more than 8 different plant types. I've spent a lot of time researching this because I've had the good fortune to go to some beautiful, very, very large gardens. They use 8 plant types. That's just a garden rule. So that means that the 8 plant types you pick are pretty important. What you're trying to avoid is what's called a specimen garden. If you want a truly magical outdoor space, planting a lot of different plant types will not help you get there. My mother did this somewhat successfully. I always tell this story about my best friend who redid her front yard in a water-wise design. It was truly beautiful in the very first month when the plants were super tiny. But then after that month, it became very apparent that what she had done was pick maybe 30 different plant types in a very small space. It did not have any flow to it. So remember, the less plants types you have, the more likely you are to create a beautiful, harmonious garden. So you want to do that with unity and repetition. This is a better example of a very large garden that has a good deal of unity and repetition in it. You have some white in there. The trees repeat. It's a very free-flowing idea. Notice there are no straight lines in this garden. You're either going to do straight or curvy. You're not generally going to do both. Many of the plants are the same species. They just are in different colors. Okay? It's actually quite monochromatic to a large extent too. It's all very close together on the color wheel. It is hot. They are hot colors as a general rule, but it is very pleasing. A mistake that I made in my own yard is I love flowers so much that I put in too many flowering plants. If you notice in this yard, there's a lot of just plain green, and it is a beautiful backdrop to the reds and pinks and whites that are in the yard. That's something to think about. You probably just need some plants that are never going to bloom or bloom in very, very small blossoms, because the green is, again, it's the neutral. It makes everything else look better. So this is the principle of unity and repetition. It creates flow and harmony in a garden. And that's important whether you use hot colors or cool colors. Okay, we're going to take a real quick, I don't think we need, well, yeah, 5-minute break. And because everybody needs to get up and get around. But before we take that break, I want you to look at the unity and harmony in this particular landscape. They've used Diamondia as their grass. That's a plant that we'll look at in a little bit more in depth, but it's very low water using. So they've created a grassy area. It's primarily pastel colors or grays. They have a lovely fountain. I think everybody should have a water feature in their yard. They do not waste water if they're done properly. And they have a nice, uniform, repetitious space here. The only thing I think they're missing is a couple of lawn chairs. I think this would be a great place to read a book or even sit down and eat a meal. All right, with that being said, I'm going to set my timer and we're going to have a 5-minute break and I'll be right back. Okay, everybody, I'm back. I hope you got a fresh cup of coffee and got ready to go for the next part. I know that Devin would like to say a couple of words real quick. So Devin, can you take it over?
Sure. Hi. Hello again. So I just wanted to mention there's a lot of talk of the plant selection, and that might have you thinking of ideas and getting ready to get out there and hit the nursery. I just want to let you know that if you are a customer of the San Bernardino Municipal Water Department, we do offer water conservation rebates. Some of those include drought tolerant plant rebates. And we are very accommodating when it comes to the selection of those plants. Of course, the goal is to save water, but we do offer that rebate to 50% off the cost of the plants up to $300. If you're looking to replace your lawn with something more water efficient, that includes the front yard, the backyard. We do also offer a turf removal program where we'll reimburse you up to $2,000 for that. So we just wanted to let you know that we have several water conservation rebates available to our customers. If you have any questions for me, please direct those to the chat box, and then I'd be more than happy to help you with that. Thank you.
I'm going to encourage you to take advantage of these rebates. You know, nobody offers plant rebates that I'm aware of anywhere else. I did get a rebate when I removed my grass, and that really helped the financial burden so that it was significantly less expensive for me to redo my own landscape. But my agency where I live, which is City of Riverside, they don't offer a plant rebate. And if you're buying your plants carefully, and I would suggest that you really shop around for plants, $300 can go a long way to getting you where you need to go. So take advantage of those rebates. They're wonderful, and they're a way for you to get part of your rate dollar back from the agencies where you're paying your bills. I mean, so you might as well take advantage of it. I wish more people did. So let's move on from this very beautiful landscape that we've got here. And let's talk about plants. So there's different types of plants, all right? There's drought tolerant plants, and then there's native plants. And we're going to talk about the difference. For this PowerPoint, just so you know, anytime you see the California poppy symbol toward the bottom of your screen, that means it's a California native. And if I have my choice, I'm going to suggest that that's what you actually get. It makes such a difference in our environment. But drought tolerant plants are from the Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean Sea, and Australia. And they really prefer drip irrigation. So there's overhead spray irrigation, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. There's also drip irrigation. And drought tolerant plants really like drip. They also bloom at different times of the year than our own natives. They don't realize that you've moved them from Australia or from around the Mediterranean Sea. So they're going to bloom differently. For most drought tolerant plants, they're going to bloom often twice a year, spring and fall, but there are some available that bloom in the winter as well. And that creates interest in your garden, and it makes your garden look wonderful throughout the entire year. You don't want a dead zone, right? When there's nothing going on in your garden. So drought tolerant plants are a nice thing to add in. That leads us to native plants, okay? Native plants, that means that they have been here forever, or they have been here so long that they are naturalized and they might as well be natives. The reason they're important is not only are they less maintenance than grass and drought tolerant plants, they also attract our local birds, bees, and butterflies. And we need to provide that habitat for them so that we don't lose them, so they don't go extinct. Natives are different though. They don't really love drip irrigation. They really like overhead spray. Overhead spray mimics rain. So what you will find is that many native plants, after they've had a year of establishment, can survive just on what we normally get in our rainy season, with the one exception. If we are in the middle of a prolonged drought, like we went through the most recent long drought, there wasn't probably enough water for most natives to survive. And you may have to supplement them in the winter by going out and spraying them with your garden hose. You never have to fertilize a native plant. They get whatever they need from your soil. So you don't have to amend the soil. You don't have to add compost. You don't have to add fertilizer, vitamins, anything. Remember in the picture I showed you with the rose in the foreground. I love roses. I want to have some roses in my yard. They're shockingly drought tolerant, but they do need to be fed. I need to get out there and give them rose food twice a year. With native plants, you don't need to do that. And that cuts down on your maintenance. You know, nobody needs to have more maintenance than they need, right? You don't need to make work for yourself. So native plants prevent part of that. And again, it's a native when you see the poppy symbol on the right-hand side of it. So we're going to start, we already mentioned California buckwheat, and I picture it twice for a reason. There is no other plant in the native plant palette that provides as much food or habitat for birds, bees, or butterflies. Now, I rarely see bees in my yard and rarely see bees on this plant. But when I say bees, I'm not talking about the honeybee that we think of when we think of a bee. I'm talking about native California bees, and they do not look like our regular bees. They also do not have stingers, and they do not produce honey, and they don't live in a hive. They look kind of like a larger black, they almost look like a beetle, only they're a lot cuter. So you're not going to be attracting something to your yard that is going to sting you or you have to be worried about. They are pollinators for native plants, and they're kind of cute. And I do get some in my yard because I have some other plants that attract bees, but I wouldn't want you to be worried about that, or especially if you have somebody who is allergic to bees. So that's something you need to think about. I have read that at any one time, the California buckwheat will be feeding as many as, or providing habitat for as many as 98 different species at any one time. That's a pretty critical plant. What I don't have pictured here is that, because I like it when they have these beautiful white balls on them. What I don't have pictured here is that they age, and as their blossoms age, they turn a beautiful rust. You can see that a little bit in the picture. So they become a beautiful fall color in the fall. They stay white like this most of the year, but they do age to that. And you don't clip them back at that point because birds come and get the seeds from them, and other little insects eat off them too. After that's been around for a couple of months, then you can clip them back and they start over again. But California buckwheat is something you really, really want to put in your native plant garden. Here's some other words. They're not every native is garden friendly. Okay, there are a lot of natives out there that are difficult to grow or challenging to grow. And you won't find that in this PowerPoint. If they're in this PowerPoint, I'll highlight one that's a little bit more difficult. If it's in this PowerPoint, you can grow it. If it's not in this PowerPoint, you still might be able to grow it, but you want to look it up and make sure that you can grow it. And I would look at the websites. Las Politas is excellent for telling you what natives will work and what habitat they need. No native wants to be watered in the summer. And this is a really difficult concept for people to get over. And it was hard for me too. You don't water them in the summer. You just don't. You don't. I mean, you got to really, you're going to say to yourself, oh, it's hot outside. It's 115. I need to give you water. Don't. They're used to that. They adapt to that. They will survive that. What they will not survive is summer water. They will die. Keep that in your mind. That makes it great because normally we throw so much water on something in the summer. That's where we use most of our water, but they don't like that. Against conventional wisdom as well, you do not plant natives in the spring. You plant them in the fall and in the winter. There's a good reason for that. They need time to set their roots and get acclimated before summer when it gets really hot. If you plant in fall, you will be so much better off. You can plant even in the winter, but after about February 1, you need to stop planting. And if you plant in March, you're really, really about a 50-50% chance of survival. So you need to plant in the fall and the winter if you're planting natives. And again, don't fertilize them. They don't need it. Don't waste your money. In fact, it'll kill them. So let's look at some natives. Right here you have the native sweet pea, which is a beautiful vine. It can be a shrub, but it does not have to be a shrub. You can grow it as a vine. It is prolific bloomer. It is very easy to grow. It needs no fertilization, no summer water. It will reward you endlessly with bountiful blossoms that birds really love. To the right of that is the native peony. You may have seen peonies back east. It is every bit as beautiful. It is a wonderful native. They come in a variety of colors. I think the red that you're seeing right there is a particularly beautiful color, but it does get a much bigger blossom. These natives, as they age, will just get better and better. The Mahila poppy is a beautiful, beautiful white and yellow shrub. I am going to warn you, it will get very, very large unless you trim it back. So if you need a plant that needs lots of room, if you have something where you need to cover a lot of space, this plant is for you. It is very easy to grow. It looks pretty darn good all year round. The blooming season is very long. To the right is a sugar bush. It is obviously also a native. It is a spectacular shrub. You will notice with many natives that the flowers are smaller. That's because they're climate adapted. The poppy on the left is an example of a larger flower, but it's still only 3 to 4 inches. But it is a beautiful, cheerful plant that provides so much color and provides much needed white. The sugar bush's flowers are not quite as exciting, but it is a beautiful backdrop plant. There is an ornamental strawberry. You can't eat the fruit off it, but it is a beautiful ground cover. It has the beautiful runners, the white and yellow flower that lasts for quite a long time. And my favorite plant on the right probably is the California lilac. California lilacs come in many shapes and sizes. They come very tall. They come as ground covers. I have both. I have one that started as a teacup and is now well over 5 feet tall. I also have a ground cover one that has white blossoms on it. They range in color from white to a very deep purple blue, and there are some pink varieties as well. So if you're looking for a very sturdy plant, this is the plant. This also attracts numerous birds and butterflies. I've never seen a bee on, well, excuse me, I take that back. One of mine does get bees in the spring, our California native bees, but primarily it attracts butterflies and birds. They love the seeds, and butterflies drink the nectar. They like to rest on it as well. A coyote bush is a very effective ground cover that you see used all throughout Southern California. It can be hedged into whatever shape you want. It provides a really, really nice backdrop. If you have an area that is difficult to grow a plant in, but you don't want to do a lot of maintenance on it, except maybe hedge it once a year, the Coyote Brush plant is excellent for that. It is a prolific plant. It will grow for years. It's very easy to grow. It's very tolerant of bad soil. The toyon is a large shrub which you can trim to a tree. You see it on the right. Those are berries that you see. It's not a particularly great picture, but it was the best one I could find that had berries on it. Needs very, very little water. You just need to get it through its establishment. It's going to get big though. It's going to get really big, maybe 8-10 feet tall easily. So make sure you put it somewhere where it has room to grow. Yarrow is without a doubt my favorite plant in the garden. And there are several reasons for that. First, I love the little flat-topped flowers that you see. Butterflies use them as resting spots. They drink from yarrow. They take the nectar out of the flowers, but they also land on the flowers and they rest because they're flat tops. So it's not unusual to see them covered with butterflies at different times of the year. They also have very unusual foliage. Now there are some on the left, which is grayish foliage, which is a nice addition. The one in the center has a more green, ferny foliage, and the one on the right is the true California native. It has a ferny foliage and a white flower, but they come in a very large variety of colors. They come in pinks, purples, pastels. They also come in a beautiful deep red called cinnamon. So I would really recommend it. They don't use much water and they will grow wider rather than taller. They stay compact. They keep a nice shape. So, and they provide food for butterflies. So they're almost an idyllic plant as long as you don't want anything taller than 2 feet. They also will spread on their own. And that's something to think about. Wherever there's a little bit of water, they will move to, they'll spread. So you can use them as a hedge, for example, instead of a traditional box leaf hedge. And you would then have a blooming hedge. So keep yarrow in mind. No matter what color you need, you can find a yarrow to accommodate that color choice. A California sunflower is a wonderful habitat for butterflies and bees. It's extremely easy to grow. It'll grow on basically if you spit on it once a year. It will stay green year round, provided there's a little bit of water to it. During the summer, you don't need to water it. It'll stay green. It's acclimated for that. But as long as it gets just a normal amount of water from rain, it will not only grow, it will thrive. It is a very cheerful flower. If you like hotter colors, it will not disappoint you. So keep California sunflower. If you want hummingbirds in your yard, you must plant penstemon. If you notice the tubular shape, they are designed by nature to be used by a hummingbird. There are tall ones, there are short ones, there are hot colors, there are cool colors. It is a species that has a wide variety of colors, heights, and growth habitat. By that, I mean some will grow tall and leggy, some will stay compact and small. Really check the Las Colitas website for that, but they are very easy to grow. They will grow next to rocks and find their way to soil. They will grow in good soil. There's so many things you can do with penstemon. And while I talked a lot about birds, I truly like hummingbirds too. And that's why I grow penstemon. I grow the purple penstemons and the pink penstemons, but that's because that's the colors I've chosen for my backyard. But believe it or not, I have a lot of hummingbirds that come and visit, and they'll ignore my hummingbird feeders and go straight to the flower. So that's how attractive a penstemon is to a yard. They're spectacular. This is a California wild grape. This is Rogers Red. Now, both of these pictures are from my own yard. On the left, I just took this, I think, last week. So it's not my California grape in its best. When I should have taken the picture is when there were a lot of grapes on it. Right now, the grapes have turned to raisins because I couldn't possibly eat that many grapes. It does produce an edible grape, but it is not like the grape we get at the grocery store. It is very small and it has a seed in it. But the birds like it and you can eat them. I'll go out there and enjoy eating a few grapes. Something important to notice is in this particular case, is that fence that it's climbing on is 6 feet tall, just a little over 6 feet. This Rogers Red started as a plant, literally the size of a coffee cup, because I bought very small plants in my yard because they were a lot less expensive. And this is what it has grown to in 6 years. Even more amazing is I have never watered it. I watered it the day I planted it and then let it be. I did that because I'm lazy and I don't have irrigation to that particular spot of my yard. That's where my experimental part, since there's no irrigation. Aha, I say, you say you'll survive without irrigation? I'll test it. And this is the Rogers Red wild grape. But I guess the most beautiful part of it is that in the fall, before the leaves fall off, it turns those beautiful red colors. It is unbelievably beautiful pretty much all year round. Sorry, I just had a message from our lovely Devin. Can you raise your hand if you guys can hear me? Or put something in the chat? I'm going to type a message. I just want to make sure that nobody lost their connection. Okay, good, good. Thank you so much. So back to Rogers Red. When the leaves fall off, it has beautiful twisted vines like any other grape does. And then about February or March, the leaves come out, the green leaves come out, it produces more grapes, and there you have it. If you're trying to cover an ugly wall, this would be your plant. It needs very, very little training. In fact, I have a tiny trellis behind it, about 2 feet. It's just grown on top of itself. I need to manage that plant a little bit better. But I don't consider that bad after 6 years. I've done nothing to it. And again, I've never fertilized it, never watered it, never fertilized it. So it's a super satisfactory plant. Sorry. Okay. Salvia. So this plant is great for butterflies. It's great for bees and it's great for hummingbirds. But the really great thing about salvia, and the one on the left is what's called the Cleveland sage, is that it can take a terrible beating from heat. I have a couple of spots in my yard where the sun beats down in the summer for hours. It almost never gets shady. It's just, you know how hot it's been. I use it to shield smaller, more delicate plants. 117 degrees in my yard, 2 days in a row this last summer, and then several other days over 110. It never faltered. It never stopped growing. It never stopped blooming. It never even looked like it needed water. So anytime you can have a plant like a Cleveland sage that can take that kind of heat beating, it's my plant. Now, there's a caveat to it. It's going to get big. It's going to get really big. If you don't feed it and you take care of it properly, which means pretty much ignore it, it's going to get really large. They will tell you that it'll get 3 feet by 3 feet. That is not true. It will get 5 feet by 5 feet easily. So find a big space and put the salvia in there. Again, I'm going to recommend the Cleveland sage, which is the purple one you see on the left, but the one on the right also does really well. Very, very easy to grow and can take a beating like no other. It's actually amazing. Agave. Who can do without agave? These are local native agaves. They are quite beautiful. The one on the right does not have the typical spiny thing. They, believe it or not, most water-wise plants, most native plants require about the same amount of water as an agave. So an agave does need some water. You can't just never water it, but they're natives. They should be able to get their water from precipitation unless we have several drought years, and they will propagate, and they add a lot of interest to the yard, right? They're beautiful. They add so much interest to your yard. Texture, nice green color. So definitely think about using some agaves. We will talk about succulents at a later part, but do remember that not all succulents and cacti are not the same thing. So definitely go with the native ones. Rock rose is another very hardy plant. It comes in different colors. It's a shrub. It's not going to grow much taller than 1.5 feet. It will keep a nice compact round shape. It needs very little trimming, no fertilization, and very little water. It is great to grow in a place where there's a lot of rocks. That's why it's called rock rose. It can survive even with very little soil. And I like both of the different colors that you see here. Is a very cheerful, happy little plant. So I would highly recommend rock rose in your native garden. So California lilac, I mentioned it earlier. This is what mine looks like. Mine has a little bit rounder habitat. This is what it looks like in the spring, where it has millions of blossoms on it. And I say that it's a little bit more particular because of the irrigation issues with it. My particular California lilacs, I have no irrigation set up to. They don't have drip. They don't get water. I have never watered them at all after the first day. And that is the key to California lilac. If you plant it in the fall, and let's say it's a dry fall, and you take your garden hose and you spray it down, go out there with a iced tea and hose it off a little bit, because most natives don't like dirty leaves. That's why they like precipitation. It cleans off their leaves. And you spray it a couple of times and you get it through into the winter. The cooler climate, the cooler time, and the natural irrigation will let it root. My own sad experiences, at one time I had 5 of them. And it was a very hot summer 4 years ago, I guess. And I was very concerned that they were going to die, and I really wanted them to survive. So I went out and watered them. And within 1 week, 2 of them had died. They don't want summer water. If you water them in the summer, they really will die. That's not a joke. California lilacs can be expensive when you purchase them, even if you purchase them from a wholesaler, because they're a little bit fragile, right? Well, they're not fragile if you don't fertilize them and you don't water them. Then they're just prolific. They do have to have good drainage though, so you don't want to plant them in clay. If your soil has got some percolation in it, they'll be fine. They work really well on holding back a slope. Now, I can't lie to you, they will only look this good for about 2 months of the year. The rest of the year, they look green. They're only green, but they're worth it. They're worth it because they're so spectacular when they do bloom. That's why they have their own page all to themselves. I love Calendra. On the left, it is a succulent that will survive in the Inland Empire. Not every succulent will survive. Cactus tend to survive better. I do love succulents, and I have some succulents, but they are in areas typically that are fairly shaded. This is one that can do with a pretty good summer beating of heat. And then there are coral bells on the right. Coral bells in the inland areas probably need a little shade. They can do well with dry shade. So if you have a tree that you want to plant a few underneath, that's not a bad idea. They also will propagate on their own. So they'll just get bigger and bigger. You can start with 2 or 3 and they will propagate and spread, and you will end up with this wonderful mass planting that you see on the right of coral bells. So something to keep in mind. No yard that has native plants should do without one of these 2. Just like you shouldn't do without yarrow either. Why? Well, because they provide variety to your yard. If you're going to have 7 or 8 plant types, make one of these one of them. The one on the bottom, because it's within my color palette, is the one that I have used frequently. Once it blooms in the fall, it will have that beautiful pink grassy bloom for 2 or 3 months. It is a very, very low maintenance plant. I planted them 6 years ago. I have yet to do anything to them. I planted them as very small plants, again, because it was less expensive. So they were literally the size of coffee cups. They are now 2 feet around. They're not going to get any bigger. That's their size limit. They bloom year after year, and I have not ever done a thing to them. Now, eventually I'm going to have to give them a butch haircut. They will need that, and I could divide them at some point, but they look so beautiful, I don't want to mess with them. They're fantastic. They've done it on their own. Again, no fertilization. That is a great plant for me because it's very carefree. I have a large space. I don't have time for a lot of maintenance. Nothing can require too much attendance. These grasses require none. So I really want you to think about putting this, and you do get this spectacular bloom. Now, the one on top will bloom also, but it doesn't bloom pink. It blooms more of a beige color, but it's still very pretty depending on your plant palette. I just happen to like the pink foamy look. For those of you with really big yards, I'm going to encourage you to plant oak trees. I never used to do this, but oaks are such a critical part of especially, well, all of California's landscape, and we don't have enough of them anymore. They are critical to habitat. They provide shade. So if you have some space, plant them. They are not really as slow growing as people think. They are if you start from a little acorn. But they're not if you even buy one. But there are smaller varieties, and there are smaller non-native varieties that act like natives. For example, there's one called holly oak. This is the classic California oak that you see in the picture. But a holly oak gets half that size and half that spread. So if you have any room at all, plant yourself a tree, okay? An oak is a good one to do it. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some non-native plants. Diamondia, which is a grass substitute, you see here, all right? You see it in between the pavers, and kangaroo paw on the left. Kangaroo paw is from Australia. It comes in orange, red, all sorts of different, yellow, different colors. It's wonderful if you like those hot colors. It's a perfect plant. It will spread. It is You can use it as a cut flower. If you cut it and take it in your house, it'll last for a month inside your house. It's not a native, but I really encourage you to use these unusual plants like kangaroo paw to add interest and bloom time to your yard. Lantana, many people think is a native because it's been here so long. And I almost put it in the native section, but I didn't because it's not really a true native. You've seen lantana used a lot, especially the yellow variety. Lantana probably is the most hardy plant that I have in the entire PowerPoint. It comes in a wide variety of colors. You can do anything to lantana and it will pretty much survive. The only bad thing is maybe you have repeated days of frost, which we don't really have here. It also comes in such a wide variety of colors, from pastels to hot colors, that you can find a lantana to suit every yard. So if you have a spot that's really difficult to grow anything, and you're not going to put a salvia in it, then put a lantana in it. Literally, you can spit on it once a year and it will grow. It's a fantastic plant. It's almost bomb-proof. There's trailing ones where their vines trail off. There's shrub ones. Find one, be happy with it. It also attracts a lot of native birds at this point. It's been here so long. They've adapted to it. Honeysuckle is not a native, but it is fantastic for erosion control, and it is very drought tolerant. It also smells good. If you want to hold back a hill, use a honeysuckle. But the word of wisdom is here, don't try to grow anything else with it. It has to be contained. If you're going to put it on a hill, it's going to take the whole hill up. It's going to happen. You may not want it to happen. You may fight with it, but you're not going to win. So don't even try it. But as something to hold back a hill, it's great. If you want to cover a fence with it, it's also fantastic, but don't try to grow another vine. Don't try to put a Rogers Red California grape next to a honeysuckle, because the honeysuckle is going to overtake it. Let it have its space. It will continuously perform. So honeysuckle is something people don't often think about, but is well worth it. African daisy obviously is from Africa, but what most people don't know is that it comes in so many different colors that if you like pastels, you can find an African daisy. If you like hot colors, you can find an African daisy. And it is super durable. It has a beautiful leaf to it. It will go on and on and on. You can plant it next to a pool where it gets splashed with chlorinated or salted water. It won't matter. It will continue to grow. It's going to grow out. It's not going to grow tall. It's also not super invasive. It's easy to control. Trailing rosemary or regular rosemary, which is on the right, yes, it's edible. It is extremely drought tolerant. It is from the Mediterranean area where they use it in food all the time. The caveat to trailing rosemary is you are going to attract non-California bees. If you have a bee problem, do not get rosemary. It will certainly attract them. But if you're not worried about bees or it's away from your house a little bit, then try some trailing rosemary if you have a really difficult spot to landscape. It does not need hardly any water. It will grow prolifically. It will go on forever. Gara is a beautiful non-native plant. I showed you both what it looks like in its clumping form and what the actual little flower looks like. It is mostly white, but it does have the lovely pink and sometimes red center. It can tolerate both heat and shade and can grow on very, very little water. So Gara is a very satisfactory plant for planting in mass when you have a difficult area. I think sedums are such an interesting plant that I think you should grow them no matter what. They are originally from Asia. They come in a wide variety of colors, but those are the two prettiest in my mind. They are clumping, which means they grow in those nice round balls. They bloom prolifically and they are pretty carefree. On the right, you see a sedum planted next to a little john or bottle brush. Bottle brush is not native either. They grow very nicely together. So I would encourage you, for interest, to take a look at sedum as well. But they can get real tall. They can get 2.5 to 3 feet tall. There are shorter varieties. My favorite. Even though I don't have hot colors in my yard, I love the hot colors. And this is a red hot poker, and it looks just like its name. No matter what, red hot poker is the star. I don't care what else you plant in your yard, it's always going to be the star of your show, just because of the beautiful vibrancy of the flower. They are not a difficult plant to grow. And if you notice on the right, you'll see that their foliage is quite attractive as well. It's quiet foliage, right? They let the flower take over, but they don't attract bad things to your yard, like bees, like maybe you don't want bees in your yard. They're a fantastic plant. They look good the majority of the year, and they are relatively low maintenance. I always have to give a plug for roses. On the drought tolerance scale, roses are actually quite tolerant. There are roses that are specifically grown for hotter interior valleys, like where we live, and they come in a variety of colors. On the left, you see what's called a self-cleaning shrub rose, which means that when there's no need to deadhead, when the flowers drop off, you don't have to go out there and clip them all off for them to continue propagating. Most roses need deadheading. That means that after the bloom dies, you need to go out and snip it, and that tells the rose to grow more flowers. But not all roses are the same. I think that no matter what, you should have them in your yard because I love them. But look in rose catalogs and look for something that is heat tolerant for our area. In my backyard, I have 6 rose trees that cover trellises. I specifically bought them for heat and smell. During our last bad summer, they never wavered. They didn't. Some of the flowers scorched, but the plant did not. And when I say scorched, it looked like somebody took a blowtorch to them. But the plant itself remained okay. They never scorched. So this is something you should think about. They take a lot less water than you think. Not much more. You almost don't have to change your watering habits for them. A cat's claw vine is a beautiful, brilliant vine. I'm going to caution you with any vines, you want to put a trellis underneath your vines because although they're plants, they will work their way into your concrete block wall and ruin it. They will certainly ruin a wood fence. They will ruin just about anything they touch. So you don't want them laying directly on your building or your wall. Even if you put a trellis up and they overcome the trellis, they will not have gotten a hold. Don't put any vine directly against your house. The pounds per square inch pressure of some of these when they're worming themselves around to grab onto something else to grow is unbelievable. Stucco is not a problem for them. Neither is a concrete block wall. So make sure with any vine you put a trellis behind it, even if it's a cheaper wood trellis. You don't have to get an expensive trellis. Just keep them a little bit off. But a cat's claw vine is spectacular. It will look this good the majority of the year. Highly encourage this one. So everybody knows bougainvillea. It comes from the Mediterranean, comes in a wide variety of colors. Everybody knows this plant because we all plant them all the time. They are extremely drought tolerant. In fact, they are a stress bloomer. What you see as a flower is not really a flower, it's a leaf, and it mimics a flower. And the less you water it, the more it will bloom. There is a couple of caveats to bougainvillea. They have very, very long spines, and they are very frost prone. So if your area is prone to frost, you probably want to understand that frost will kill a bougainvillea. Now we don't get that many frosts. So one night of frost, you might be okay. 2, 3 nights, probably not. So get bougainvillea is great as a deterrent from thieves or burglars because of the long spines, and they're a little bit difficult to maintain because of that. I say they're well worth it for their vibrant color. They do come in peach, white, pink, red, coral. I think they're well worth it for that. If you're looking to cover a large amount of space with a very vibrant color, bougainvillea is probably your plant. So let's talk just 1 second about hens and chicks and other succulents. Succulents don't necessarily do well in the Inland Empire. People always think that succulents are cactus, but that is not necessarily the case. So if you're going to plant something like hens and chicks or other succulents, you want to make sure that they have some cover from the summer sun. I learned this the hard way because I love succulents so much. I ignored my own advice and planted some, and they very quickly scorched in the summer. And I've replanted them in more strategic places. They're not going to make it through the extreme summer heat. If you can find an area where they are shaded somewhat through the worst part of the day, they will be okay. They are not more drought tolerant than a rosemary. They are not really more drought tolerant even than a rose. If you plant a succulent, it's because you like them, not because you think they're super drought tolerant like a bougainvillea. I like them. I have them planted. So hens and chicks is a particularly good one. It does spawn off those little chicks like you see there. So go with your succulents, but be smart about it. Strawberry tree is one of my favorites. I'm sorry to tell you that the strawberry tree on the left is not a really great picture of one. I just had a hard time finding a really great picture. The fruit that you see on the right actually is edible, is my understanding. Mine haven't fruited yet. It tastes like a kiwi, but looks like a strawberry, hence the name strawberry tree. Birds love it. They love the little flowers on the right, and they like the fruit. It is not a very large tree. It's only going to grow to about 10 feet. And normally you're going to have red bark on a strawberry tree. This one is in a bad phase of its growing where it hasn't shed its outer brown bark. They usually shed their outer brown bark and have beautiful red bark, much like a manzanita. So I would recommend a strawberry tree. Mexican bird of paradise, spectacular plant, will grow on almost any condition. Basically almost doesn't even need irrigation. It is obviously from Mexico. They also come in a yellow variety. Here's one that everybody thinks is a native and is not, the butterfly bush. I grow butterfly bushes because butterflies are super attracted to them. They are a wonderful plant. They come in a wide variety of colors. You need to trim them back. They are more maintenance. You need to trim them back once a year or they grow incredibly rangy. Some varieties do better than the others. The darker purple, blue, even red ones do better than the paler colors, but they will attract butterflies like you've never seen. So if that's what you're looking for, that's the plant you need. Palo Verde tree, we all know that from Arizona, has the beautiful green bark, yellow flowers, and it provides the most awesome shade to sit under. It's dappled shade. It's not super dark, but it is a beautiful, beautiful canopied tree. If you're looking for a tree that doesn't need a lot of water, I would really consider a Palo Verde. Crepe myrtles are not native either. They come in a wide variety of colors. They have spectacular bark. My favorite is it's called the red diamond. It is a very deep red. This pink is my granddaughter's favorite, which is why it's in here. You can get them in shrub form. You can get them multi-trunked. You can also get them in tree form. And they will truly bloom just like you see here with very little care. Iris, I would suggest that you stick in anywhere that you can't get anything else to grow. They can grow without any water at all. They do need to be fed once or twice a year. I usually do mine about once a year. There are repeat bloomers. They will bloom in the spring and in the fall. Iris is an unusual looking leaf, and they provide a nice contrast in the yard. If you have a bare spot that you need something small, get an iris. I would tell you to look into iris societies and buy iris from them. When you buy them from growers or online, they can be very expensive. If you get them from an iris society, there's one here in Riverside, they're a lot less expensive. We're getting to the end of our plant section. This is a desert willow. I had this planted at one of my houses. Again, like a Palo Verde, it has beautiful dappled shade. It has this beautiful pink flower on it. It blooms for at least 2 to 3 months. Very, very easy tree to grow. So that was the end of our plant section. We're only scheduled to go another 15 minutes or so, but I think we can manage to get through this pretty quickly. So maintenance is an issue for all of us, and it really depends on what kind of plants you're maintaining. That just makes sense, right? You're going to need to learn a little bit more about your plants. Grass, when you have a huge front yard of just grass, you've only got to learn about one plant. But if you're going to do a garden, you need to learn a little bit more about what you've got in it. So it's dependent on whether it's drought tolerant, natives, grass, or traditional plants. And as a reminder, this is the time of year when you can really reduce your watering. Even though we may have some hot days, there's so much less sunlight. It gets dark earlier that you need less irrigation. So water accordingly. Fall is your best opportunity to save water. So if you have drought tolerant plants, okay, like this kangaroo paw, remember, they think they're still in another part of the world. They don't realize that they've been transplanted to Southern California. A lot of plants you fertilize in the spring, but if they're just Mediterranean or Australian plants, you want to fertilize them now, okay? Because it's our fall, but it's their spring. They came from a different area, different hemisphere. You're going to cut them back first if you need to. But the only time you would cut them back, honestly, is if they've just grown out of control or you have a diseased broken part. Otherwise, just let them be. I would always check the species first. This is good information for generally all drought tolerant plants. But if you have a plant that you're really in love with and you don't want to mess it up, make sure you Google it first. Always clean up the leaves and debris, and that is true across the board. You don't have to go out once a week and clean up every leaf that you see. But remember, you can compost those leaves. But when you have a layer of debris and leaves around the base of a plant, it makes it harder for that plant to get oxygen and to get water, and bugs tend to congregate there. And you don't want a lot of bugs on your plants no matter what. Those are not all symbiotic relationships. So even if you're just on the phone, take a little bucket and clean up a few leaves here and there. You don't want them to get buried in it. If you're talking about natives, and here's another picture of a giant penstemon growing amongst rocks, don't fertilize them. That is not ever going to be part of your maintenance routine if it's a native plant. You want to plant them in fall. You also want to cut them back in fall if it's really necessary. Again, you only want to do that if they're diseased or too big. Do it sparingly and clean up the leaves and debris around them. When they shed leaves, they tend to congregate around the base of the plant, encouraging bug growth. They don't need it either. So clean up your leaves and debris always. Grass is a whole different issue, right? So even though grass is not drought tolerant, you still might have, like you need to know how to maintain it. So you want to fertilize grass 3 times a year, late summer, early spring, and fall. I would alternate those feedings between granular and liquid. You don't want to only feed them a liquid diet. You know, the ones that go on the end of your hose. You want to intersperse that with granular food. It penetrates better and lasts longer. That makes sense when you think about it. You want to de-thatch. And I added a picture this time of what thatch looks like. Thatch is really just debris and grass clippings that have compacted on top of the soil. And that can strangulate your grass because each grass blade is its own plant. It can also allow fertilizer to not soak down, water to not soak down into your soil. So you want to dethatch. How do you do that? Well, there's all sorts of YouTube videos on dethatching, and I thought about incorporating one, but they're long. There's a dethatching rake that you can pull. It looks like razor blades, a rake with razor blades. There's also a dethatching machine that you can rent from any of the big box stores. And I would recommend, dethatching is hard work. It is well worth it. If you're gonna have grass, it might as well look beautiful. And dethatching is part of that process. If you fertilize on top of thatch, you can see yourself that it's not gonna penetrate where the soil and the roots should be. If you dethatch and fertilize, your grass will reward you the next spring with looking spectacular. So that's what I'm going to recommend to you. Grass should really be at least 3 to 4 inches tall. And the reason is that each individual blade of grass, it shields the other blades of grass from sunburn and from other things, weeds, seeds going in. The taller it is, the better it will be, the healthier it will be, and the better it will look. Fall is a great time to do your lawnmower maintenance. And you want to make sure that you clean your lawnmower blades in between. If you use an outside service to mow your lawn, make sure that they are cleaning their lawnmower blades between your house and the other houses that they're doing. Any disease that is in the grass of some other house, if they don't clean those lawnmower blades, it's going to be in your grass. That's how it spreads. So make sure that you do your own lawnmower maintenance and you clean those lawnmower blades carefully, but make sure your service does as well. Traditional plants. This is a newer area for me. This is the first time I've talked about that. So many of us will have yards that don't have grass only and don't have drought tolerant plants only or native plants only. We have things that we grew up with, like the begonias on the right. Okay, so I'm going to say it's a catch-all phrase for everything that we didn't talk about already. These are the plants that you want to fertilize when they're growing in spring. Right now is when you want to probably cut them back. Just trim them back a little bit, clean up debris, make sure you deadhead the flowers, get them ready to kind of rest over winter and be ready to come forward in spring. Now, iris is a little bit of an exception. I don't have that listed here. It's not a bad idea to fertilize iris now with bone meal. And you don't want to prune your roses until January. It's got to be really cold before you prune your roses. January being the best one, even as late as February 1st. But January is really when you should. And again, you can reduce your watering from now through the spring for these more traditional plants and clean up their debris. Okay, make sure that they're debris free too. So I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try. I always like to show, this is my yard. I showed you the picture earlier. I think everybody should have a water feature. And this is exactly why. See these little birds? This is a slow-mo. I took a video of it in slow-mo because you can't see them there so quickly. On any given day, I have numerous birds using this. Now, I chose a wide-lipped pot because birds need a place to land. I've also had hawks. I've had blue jays. I've had falcons. I've had all sorts of birds come. But you know, they need a place to drink too. And it never occurred to me how many birds I would get until I set this up. This was not an expensive feature to set up in my yard at all. And it is very water wise. The water recirculates. It only adds water when it gets really low. So I really wanted to share this with you. I really hope that you'll consider having some sort of water feature in your yard. Oh goodness, there we go. So this is my must be said. We don't say enough about, we want to be water wise. I want to be water wise. I work in water sufficiency. I have for the majority of my career. But I don't think we say enough about the reduction in green waste or maintenance. There's no doubt about it that you're going to have some maintenance. That just goes without saying. But it is so much reduced in a water-wise landscape. Even weeding alone, it's just so much less. It's a different type of maintenance though. And by that, I mean, you may go a really long time with doing nothing. Sometimes I'll go for 4 or 5 months with doing nothing in my yard, except wandering around in it or using it. But then I may have to spend 4 or 5 hours cleaning up, and I have a big yard, cleaning up, deadheading, doing something here or there. It's not a big deal. It's not weekly grass maintenance. It's not weekly fertilization. It's not 3 times a year. I don't think we give this enough play. But either way, it is so worth it. It's a mind shift. We have to switch the way we think about things. As silly as it sounds, my little birds looking at the butterflies, this is a huge sense of enjoyment, not just for me, but for my family. And then if you're going to combine that with less water and less maintenance and green waste, it's just a win-win. So always got to be said. This is our last section. Yeah.
Maria had a question about the water feature. She wanted to know, will squirrels get in water features? Do you have anything to comment on that? Are you familiar?
I do. And you know, I didn't bring it up because I didn't think I should. So I was very concerned about this because I also have raccoons in my backyard. I live in a city, but I have raccoons. They've never touched the water feature. It's tall enough that it keeps squirrels and raccoons out of it. Never seen anything into birds out of it. Now that pot is about two feet tall. And I didn't think about this when I got it. I just liked the pot. And it's actually worked out quite well. I have another smaller fountain in the back. Because of the raccoons, it's only a foot off the ground. I don't keep it running year round. I only use it when I need it. The one that I have where I can see from my kitchen is the one that I just showed, and I've never had a problem with that. Does that answer your question, Maria? I hope. Okay, I'm going to talk about irrigation and then, oh, okay. I see that Maria raised her hand. Devin, if you could field that for me, I'm going to start on irrigation, but please interrupt me if you need to, because we're a little bit short of time. The key thing is the plant needs to drive the irrigation, not the other way around. A lot of times landscapers will put in plants or will put in irrigation and then put in plants. That's wrong. The plants go first. Okay, the plants are what's important, not how wonderful your irrigation system looks. Okay, so you're not aiming for a beautiful irrigation system. You're aiming for a beautiful garden with beautiful plants. And if they say they're going to do that, stop them and tell them, no, this is not how we do it. There are 2 types of drip, okay, inline and tubing. And we're going to look at a picture of both of them next. Natives and drought tolerant plants really want some sort of drip rather than some sort of spray. There's a caveat to that. If you happen to be a hand waterer, God bless you, That is the most efficient way. Almost always you will have the best looking yard. No hand water over waters. Okay, so good for you. If you can get by with hand watering, really native plants are the plants for you, because you can hand water them until they're established and then let them go. And you have saved the money of an irrigation system. Pro tip here, go to an irrigation store, not a big box store. It's way less expensive. And there are different quality products that go in big box stores than go to irrigation stores. So much cheaper, you'll be stunned. So go to an irrigation store. They're used to dealing with regular people all the time. Don't be intimidated by it because it's an irrigation store. This is how a drip system is set up, okay? I think you're gonna have access to this, so I understand it's almost 2 o'clock. If some of you have to jump off the call, I wanna finish this so that Devin can have the recording for her city. So I'm gonna go through the drip. Without a doubt, drip is the most efficient irrigation system possible. It is not difficult. If you look at the picture on the right, that is all it is. It is basically the same things you need for any other irrigation system with a tubing adapter and drip tubing. That is the only difference. On your regular irrigation system you have now, you have a pressure regulator. You may have a backflow preventer. You should always have a filter. But drip is just an extension of that. That being said, you really want to use a pressure regulator with drip. Drip operates at about 20 pounds per square inch of pressure. Most of you will have at least 50 pounds per square inch of pressure coming into your house. The pressure regulator reduces the pressure. And if you don't do that, your drip will blow apart. You can buy those at the irrigation store, at a big box store. And many of the filters that you see, the green filter you see in the picture, have pressure regulators built into them. Make sure you get those. It's very critical. Once you've got your irrigation system set up, it's not unusual for it to last, I'm going to say 20 years. Because if you bury it under mulch, it's away from the sun. It won't be damaged by the sun. And it's so little water going through it, it's not unusual to have it last for years. Does that mean you don't have to check it? You should still check it once a month. You should always check your irrigation system once a month. And you want to flush it once a year. How do you flush it? Do you see on the right side of the picture, there's an end cap? You unscrew the end cap and you run it and let the water flow out the end. Okay, that flushes everything. Then screw the end cap back on and you're done. It's that simple. So you want to always flush it in case any little debris or rocks get in there. This is what drip looks like. This is inline drip. Okay, so you can see at the top, there's a groove, right? I don't know if I might be able to annotate this. Let's see. I'm gonna see right here. I don't know if you can see that. That's where the filter is built in. Here's another example of it built in, okay? Oh, gosh, let me go back. There we go. So the filter to filter the water is built into the drip system. That's why we call it inline drip. There's a dripper every 12 inches. This is not my favorite drip, okay? It's not, because you're not gonna necessarily plant a plant every 12 inches. I don't wanna water things that I don't have a plant at. Just the same, because it has the filter built in and it is very easy to lay out, you'll find a lot of landscapers want to use it and you may want to use it too. So it's definitely worth looking at. Excuse me, let me move forward. This is what's called point-to-point drip, and it is much more efficient. So you can see in the top picture, you can see the black larger line and little snaky like things coming off it. The black line doesn't have any drippers built into it. What those little tubes coming off do is they have drippers built into them. And at the bottom, you can see pictures of different drippers. So you can attach a dripper directly to the line, or you can use what we call spaghetti tubing to run a line to a plant. It is much more efficient. In the middle picture, you see an example of a mini sprayer that has been attached to a drip line. That works. If you're going to use drip on native plants, that really works well. They don't like the tiny drippers, but they actually like the spray. They're fine with that because it kind of mimics rain. They can survive that. So this is an example. When you use point to point, you have natural spacing between the plants instead of enforced artificial spacing set up by inline drip. And the heads that you see in the bottom, they're color coded. Now, not every company follows the same color coding, but for example, the red might be 2 gallons an hour. The blue might be 1 gallon an hour. And that's something to think about with drip. You're not going to let it run for 10 minutes. You're going to let it run for an hour because that plant might need 2 gallons of water. That's not a lot. It's the amount of water it needs. If you ran a spray irrigation system for grass, you would literally have gone through 1,000 gallons, not 2. So don't be dismayed by the time. Go by what the water is being used at, the rate of flow, not by the time. Okay, I was a little bit long-winded, but I finally did make it to the end. I want to thank you very much for attending. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm certainly available for questions. I don't need to run off. And Devin, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I just want to thank our guests again for joining us for our first virtual webinar, and also to let you know this is the first of hopefully many that we'll be offering, even when we do begin offering our in-person classes. We would like to add our virtual webinars going forward on a more regular basis. So if you enjoyed this, please share the information with those you think might also benefit from it. As I mentioned at the top of the class, we're going to be posting this recording on our social media pages, directly on our YouTube channel. So if you want to refer back to the information that you heard today, you can rewatch it there, and you could also share it with others so they can be ready for the next class if they want to participate. So thank you. I will also be here if you have any questions. We're more than happy to do that. Otherwise, have a great day. But if you do want to stick around for questions, we can go over that now. Thank you. Charlie, you should be able to speak now.
Yes. I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for the information. I'm with a neighborhood association, and I just found out that, I'll be able to tell my members to go on YouTube and get the information. I was busy writing down all of the information about the plants and seeing pictures. It really made a lot of sense. So I'm going
Good. I'm glad.
I'll be starting some of that.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Glad to
Okay.
hear you found it useful. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you for attending today.